I'm Emily. I was a 25-year-old living a quiet, unremarkable existence with my boyfriend Mike in a relationship that had seen better days. We'd been together since college, a pair drawn together more by familiarity than by the fervent passion of star-crossed lovers. Our arguments were frequent, often about Mike's disinterest in planning for the future or his latest gaming marathon that would last well into the early hours, leaving me to sleep alone. We were two people dancing around the inevitable conversation of, "Where's this going?" without ever actually taking the floor. It's not that we didn't care for each other. It's just that somewhere along the line, we stopped trying to make it work. My parents, Sue and George, were the antithesis of us. Married for over 30 years, they still exchanged loving glances and shared private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were my foundation, the steadfast love I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike over something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to do it, and once again, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. "Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do?" I had asked, exasperation straining my voice. "It's just laundry, Em. It'll get done. Eventually," he had replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument had fizzled out as they usually did, with neither of us truly addressing the underlying issues. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, the warmth of their chatter was a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument with Mike. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, the world turned on its axis. Headlights merged with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I awoke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital, the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, and a heavy blanket of dread. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't make it, and my legs, my perfectly normal, taken-for-granted legs, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Mike, the man I had just argued with about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to truly register, a hollow despair took root in me. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now seemed like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved both too quickly and not at all. After what seemed like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents, Janet and Bob, a step behind him. The atmosphere was thick with a somberness that made my heart sink even lower, if that was possible. Mike pulled a chair up next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. "Hey, Em," Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, actually." "Thinking?" I echoed, my voice dull. "About what?" "About us," he said, and his eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. All of this, it's made me see how short life can be." I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come," he continued, squeezing my hand. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for a sign of the impulsive Mike I knew, the one who acted first and thought later. But all I saw was earnestness. His mother, Janet, stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you." "And it's not out of pity," Bob added quickly. "It's because we love you, and we want to support Mike in taking this step." I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, unexpected, and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering his support in the most uncertain time of my life. "Mike, My voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. "It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel," he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents, about the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted? For me to be loved and cared for, no matter what? Mike, I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But yes, I found myself saying, the words stronger than I felt. Yes, I'll marry you. A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days, spread across Mike's face. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house was too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought having Mike with me would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was quickly learning that his presence was a reminder of what was missing, not a replacement. The first few days, he was attentive, always checking on me, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair into the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. "Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are starting to pile up." He didn't look away from the screen. "I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job." "But I can take care of myself during the day," I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. "You don't need to be here all the time." Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I?" I was taken aback by his tone. "Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. "You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nursemaid." His words stung, and I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone, I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike who had lovingly promised to be by my side, in sickness and in health, seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer, and the excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that didn't seem to have room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad, and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway, watching as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. "Em, I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either, all this." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could maybe spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I gotta go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghost of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the silence left in the wake of my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intent on looking through the photo albums. But as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. Confusion knotted my brow. "Mike!" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing? Yeah, it was getting dusty, and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me. But it was my mom's favorite, I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. We can get another painting, Em. It's no big deal. But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. There, she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "We're just making things nicer for you. You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time I brought it up, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed, I turned to Mike, who was scrolling through his phone, as had become his nighttime ritual. "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house. My things." He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this stuff." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings?" He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to take some of the load off you." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation, the disrespect. But I was tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore and confided in Anna, my closest friend, who was also a massage therapist. She had been helping with my rehabilitation, her visits a rare source of relief. "Anna, things are going missing around the house," I confided as she worked on my stiff muscles. "And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have, but he just brushes it off. Says his parents are helping us by decluttering." I let out a hollow laugh. "But it's only my family's things that are disappearing." Anna's brows furrowed in concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often? Keep an eye out?" The idea sparked something in me, a plan forming from the embers of my frustration. "Could you, I don't know, maybe help me set up some sort of camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" With a nod of determination, Anna agreed. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna came back the next day with some discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I wasn't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna returned with the recordings, and we sat down to listen. The voices of Mike and his parents filled the room, and the blood in my veins turned to ice as their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "And once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, the place will sell for a fortune, and all those antiques? Pure profit," his mother added, her tone greedy. "We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place," his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. These people, who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna reached over, her hand gripping mine tightly. "We have to do something, Em," she said, her voice laced with anger. I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. "We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said, every smile they gave, felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when I noticed something was off. The usual noise of the city that drifted in through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to see what was happening, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. "Mike!" I called out, my voice laced with panic. "Where are the ramps?" He came into the room, feigning ignorance. The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. Thought they needed fixing. I stared at him, the man I thought I knew. And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around? His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. I just thought you'd be safer inside for now. You know, until we get new ones. The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't from my injury. Safer? Or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me stewing in a mix of anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident, she said, touching my shoulder with feigned tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. I didn't realize needing ramps qualified as a hazard, I replied, my voice steady though my insides were shaking. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best. That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and cheaper thrills. I reached for my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the number Anna had given me for emergencies. Anna, I whispered when she picked up. They've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home. Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the tumultuous sea I was drowning in. Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We're going to sort this out. Next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered towards the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and woman wearing crisp suits and stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization, here to assess my living situation. Beside them was my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. Emily, we're here to make things right, Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. We need to establish the facts first, Emily. I'll need to see the house. Check against the inventory of your parents' belongings. As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etching his face. Em, what's going on? Who are these people? I looked at him, really looked at him, allowing the full weight of my gaze to settle on his shoulders. I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected. Janet and Bob entered the fray, confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Emily, darling, what is this about? Janet's voice trembled. It's about my rights, my home, and the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance. Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing. Bob's face paled. Now, Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied, the recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. And I have more than just missing items to discuss. Mike's parents looked at each other, the facade of the caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being. The advocates from the Disability Service spoke up. Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action. As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now, the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain. But I shook my head. Save it, Mike. I've heard enough. Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond at the ready, with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. "We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper," he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their own deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. "We never meant for things to go this far," she whispered, when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. "You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions." Mike stood, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, the history we shared playing out in a flash before my eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Mike. You chose this path." The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty. Reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With the help of Anna and a dedicated team, I started physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em, you're doing it!" The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. And so I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger. My name's Melly, and I guess you could say my life turned upside down when I met Alex. We clicked instantly at the accounting firm where we both worked, and before I knew it, we were planning a wedding. I was over the moon, of course, but meeting his family, that was a whole different ballgame. Alex always talked about his mom, Mrs. Donovan, with such admiration. So, the day we were supposed to meet her for dinner, I was a bundle of nerves, smoothing down my simple blue dress and double-checking my reflection for the umpteenth time. "Relax, Melly, she's going to love you," Alex assured me as we drove to his childhood home. But the moment we walked through the door, Mrs. Donovan's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "Well, you're certainly slender, aren't you?" she remarked, her tone cool. I tried to laugh it off. "I guess I am. Never been much of an eater." Mrs. Donovan hummed, her expression unreadable. "I hope you're taking care of yourself. A woman should have some robustness, you know." Alex, bless him, jumped in. "Mom, Melly's just fine. She's healthy." Dinner was an uncomfortable affair. Mrs. Donovan's eyes were constantly on me, making me squirm every time I took a bite. I could feel her judging my every move. The worst part came when I excused myself to the restroom. As I passed the living room, I overheard Mrs. Donovan whispering to her sister, "She looks sickly. How will she bear Alex's healthy children?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The rest of the evening was a blur. I barely touched my food and struggled to keep a smile plastered on my face. On the drive back, I was quiet, the words echoing in my mind. Alex noticed. "Hey, you okay? You've been quiet since dinner." I sighed. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." But inside, I was reeling. Mrs. Donovan's words had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I wondered if this was just the beginning of a long road of judgment and disapproval. Little did I know, it was only the tip of the iceberg. As the days turned into weeks, the dinners at Mrs. Donovan's became a regular ordeal. Each invitation felt like a summons, each meal a trial. Alex, ever the optimist, kept reassuring me that things would get better, but they only seemed to worsen. One particular evening stands out in my memory. We arrived at Mrs. Donovan's to find an even more extravagant spread than usual. The dining table was overflowing with dishes, rich gravies, fatty roasts, and sides heavy with butter and cream. As soon as we sat down, Mrs. Donovan was on the offensive. "Melly, you look even thinner than last time. You really should eat more," she said, piling my plate high with food. I tried to protest, "Oh, Mrs. Donovan, this is too much. I really can't." "Nonsense." She cut me off. "You need to build some strength, dear. Especially if you and Alex are planning a family." I forced a smile and took a bite. Mrs. Donovan's eyes flickered with something like triumph. I glanced at Alex, hoping for some support, but he just shrugged apologetically. I felt my stomach knot up, not just from the rich food, but from the undercurrent of criticism in her words. Dinner progressed with painful slowness. Mrs. Donovan kept pushing more food my way, commenting on every bite I took, or didn't take. "You know, Melly, a good wife should know how to cook hearty meals. It's important for a family." I felt a sting at her words. "I do cook, Mrs. Donovan, but I prefer healthier options." She scoffed. "Healthy is fine, but this," she gestured at my barely touched plate, "is just pickiness. You're setting a bad example." By the end of the meal, I was both nauseous and seething with anger. The drive home was tense. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Alex, your mom's comments are really hurtful. It's like she's constantly judging me." Alex was silent for a moment before responding. "I know, Melly. I'll talk to her, okay? I'm sure she doesn't mean it the way it sounds." But a part of me doubted that anything would change. Mrs. Donovan had made her feelings clear, and no amount of talking seemed to soften her stance. Each subsequent dinner only reinforced my feelings of inadequacy. Mrs. Donovan's remarks became more pointed, her scrutiny more intense. "Melly, are you avoiding my food deliberately? You barely eat anything I make." I tried to explain. "It's not that, Mrs. Donovan. Your food is very rich, and it doesn't always agree with me." She tutted disapprovingly. "A little discomfort is nothing. You need to eat more, put on some weight. It's not healthy to be so thin." Her words echoed in my head long after each dinner, amplifying my insecurities and doubts. The thought of facing another meal at her house filled me with dread. My relationship with Alex was strong, but the shadow of his mother's disapproval loomed over us, a constant, unsettling presence. As I lay awake many nights, I wondered how long I could endure this. The discomfort in my stomach after each meal was a stark reminder of the growing discomfort in my heart. I felt like an outsider, unwelcome and misunderstood, and I couldn't help but worry about the future of our relationship under the weight of his mother's judgment. As the days rolled into weeks, my unease around Mrs. Donovan turned into outright dread. The constant scrutiny, the endless comments about my weight and eating habits, it was all becoming too much. So I made a decision, one that I knew wouldn't sit well with her. I started avoiding meals at her house. The next time Alex mentioned going over for dinner, I hesitated before speaking up. "Alex, I don't think I can go tonight." He looked surprised. "Why not? Mom's making that roast you liked." I took a deep breath. "It's not about the food. It's... Your mom makes me uncomfortable. I can't keep pretending it's okay." Alex's face fell. "Melly, she's just trying to be caring, in her own way. She doesn't mean to upset you." I shook my head, frustration building up. "It's not caring, Alex. It feels like she's attacking me, always commenting on how I look, what I eat. I can't deal with it anymore." We left it at that, but I could tell Alex was torn. He wanted to keep the peace, but I needed him to understand my side. The next family dinner I missed set off a real storm. Mrs. Donovan called me the next day, her voice icy. "Melly, I noticed you didn't grace us with your presence last night. Is everything all right?" I tried to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, Mrs. Donovan, I just wasn't feeling up to it." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Not feeling up to it? You do realize it's rude to decline family dinners without a good reason. You're part of this family now, or so I thought." Her words stung, and I felt my patience snap. "With all due respect, Mrs. Donovan, being part of this family shouldn't mean I have to endure being criticized all the time." There was a moment of stunned silence before she retorted, "Criticism? I'm merely concerned about your health, Melly. A wife should be strong, healthy. I'm worried you're not suitable for Alex." That hit a nerve. "Suitable? I love Alex and he loves me. That's what matters, not your opinion on my health." The conversation ended soon after, but the damage was done. The rift between us grew wider, deeper. Alex tried to mediate, but his attempts only made things worse. One evening, as we sat quietly in our living room, he broached the subject. "Melly, I spoke to Mom. She's really upset. She thinks you're avoiding her." I let out a bitter laugh. Avoiding her? She's been nothing but harsh and judgmental since day one. What does she expect? Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking exasperated. "She's my mom, Melly. I can't just ignore her. Can't you two try to work things out?" I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "Alex, it's not about working things out, it's about respect. She doesn't respect me, and I don't know if I can keep pretending it doesn't hurt." The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was, at least until the reception. Everything was perfect. The ceremony, the vows, Alex looking at me like I was the only one in the room. But then, at the reception, everything changed. I remember holding a glass of wine, the same wine everyone else was drinking. It tasted a bit off, but I figured it was just nerves. I took a sip, and that's the last thing I remember before waking up in a stark white hospital room. Confused and groggy, I tried to sit up. That's when I heard them, Alex and his mom, just outside my room. Mrs. Donovan's voice was sharp. "See what I mean, Alex? She can't even handle a simple toast. She's too weak, too fragile for our family." I felt a pang of hurt, but I was too weak to respond. Alex's voice, full of worry, cut through. "Mom, stop it. This isn't the time. We don't even know what happened." I wanted to shout, to tell them I was okay, that I wasn't weak, but my voice was a mere whisper. Then the door opened, and a doctor walked in, a serious look on his face. "Mrs. Donovan," he said, addressing me, "you gave us quite a scare. We found traces of a sedative in your system. Did you take anything before the ceremony?" I shook my head weakly. "No, nothing. Just the wine." The doctor frowned. "The wine? But no one else had this reaction. It's very unusual." Alex stepped in, his face etched with concern. "Doctor, are you saying someone might have tampered with her drink?" The doctor hesitated. "It's a possibility we can't ignore. We'll need to run some more tests." I lay there, stunned. Someone had drugged me? On my wedding day? But who? And why? As the doctor left to arrange the tests, Alex came to my side, taking my hand. "Melly, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this is happening." I tried to smile, to reassure him, but my mind was racing. The only thing I could taste was the bitterness of the wine and Mrs. Donovan's harsh words echoing in my head. That night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. The realization that someone might have deliberately hurt me was terrifying, and the worst part was not knowing who or why. I looked over at Alex, asleep in the chair next to my bed, and felt a wave of sadness. Our wedding day was supposed to be about us, our love. Instead, it ended with me in a hospital bed, surrounded by suspicion and fear. Back home from the hospital, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought that someone had drugged me at my own wedding was like a dark cloud hanging over me. And deep down, I had a gnawing suspicion about who it might be. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Alex and I were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. I turned to him, my voice shaky. "Alex, I need to talk to you about something serious." He muted the TV, looking concerned. "What's up, Melly?" I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I can't shake off the feeling that your mom might have had something to do with it." Alex's face changed instantly. "What? Melly, that's crazy talk. Why would you even think that?" I could feel my frustration mounting. "Think about it, Alex. All those comments, the way she's always on my case. And then I suddenly fall ill after drinking wine that tasted odd. It's not that far-fetched." Alex stood up, pacing the room. "Melly, you're talking about my mom. She can be tough, sure, but she wouldn't do something like that. You're letting your imagination run wild." I stood up too, my voice rising. "Am I, Alex? Or have you just been turning a blind eye to all the things she's said and done? Can't you see she doesn't like me?" He stopped pacing, looking pained. "Melly, this is serious. Accusing someone of drugging you, that's a big deal. You can't just throw around accusations without proof." I felt tears prick my eyes. I thought you'd at least consider what I'm saying, but it seems like you'll always take her side. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about taking sides, Melly. It's about being rational. We can't accuse people based on a hunch. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. So, what am I supposed to do? Just forget it happened? He came over, trying to put his arm around me, but I stepped back. We need to think this through, Melly. Maybe talk to the police again, see if they found anything new. I nodded, though I felt far from convinced. Fine, we'll talk to them. But Alex, if it turns out I'm right, I don't know what I'll do. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept going back to Mrs. Donovan, her words, her looks. The doubt and fear were like a poison, and I knew I had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A couple of weeks after the hospital incident, we were invited to another family gathering at Mrs. Donovan's house. I was hesitant to go, but Alex insisted it would be good for us to show a united front. As we walked into Mrs. Donovan's house, the atmosphere was tense. I could feel eyes on me, whispering under their breath. Mrs. Donovan greeted us with a smile. "Melly, dear, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with something that didn't quite sound like sincerity. I forced a smile back. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Donovan." Dinner was served, and I noticed Mrs. Donovan made a point of bringing me a separate dish. "I made this especially for you, Melly, considering your delicate condition." Her emphasis on delicate didn't go unnoticed. I eyed the dish warily. It looked normal, but after the wedding, I couldn't be sure. Alex, oblivious to my discomfort, started eating his meal. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. Mrs. Donovan watched me, a hint of a smirk on her face. "Not hungry, Melly? I made it just for you." I looked up, meeting her gaze. "I'm just not feeling all that well, Mrs. Donovan, but thank you." The room was filled with murmurs and side glances. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, judging, questioning. Alex, noticing my discomfort, leaned in. "You okay?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. What if she had done something to the food again? I couldn't take any chances. I whispered to Alex, "Can we switch plates? I'm not comfortable eating this." He looked confused, but obliged, swapping our plates. As he reached for a bite of my food, Mrs. Donovan's hand shot out, stopping him. "No, Alex, don't!" she exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. The room went silent. Everyone's eyes were now on her. Alex looked up, startled. "Mom? What's wrong?" Mrs. Donovan's face had lost all color. She stammered, looking for an excuse. It's just... That dish is specially made for Melly. It's not to everyone's taste." I stared at her, my suspicions growing stronger. "Why not, Mrs. Donovan? What's in it that's so special?" She fumbled for words, her usual composure slipping away. It's just a special recipe." The tension in the room was palpable. Alex looked between his mother and me, confusion turning to realization. "Mom, what did you do?" Mrs. Donovan was silent, her eyes darting around the room. I knew then, without a doubt, that my suspicions were right. There was something in that food, something she didn't want Alex to eat. The room was heavy with tension following the incident with the plates. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, on Mrs. Donovan, who looked like she was caught in a trap. Alex, his face a mix of anger and disbelief, turned to his mother. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you freak out about me eating Melly's food?" Mrs. Donovan was fumbling for words, her usual poise nowhere to be seen. "It's nothing, just... It was made for Melly, not for you." I couldn't hold back anymore. "That's not good enough, Mrs. Donovan. You've been against me from the start. What did you put in my food?" The room erupted into murmurs. Mrs. Donovan's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "I didn't put anything in your food, Melly. This is ridiculous." I stood up, my hands trembling. "It's not ridiculous. Ever since I started coming to these dinners, I've felt sick. And then the wedding. Someone drugged my drink, and now this? It's too much of a coincidence." Alex stood up too, his voice firm. "Mom, if you did something to Mellie's food, you need to tell us now. This is serious." Mrs. Donovan's face crumpled. I just wanted to protect you, Alex. She's not right for you. She's weak, sickly." I felt a surge of anger. Protect him? By making me sick? By drugging me? The guests were now openly staring, the air thick with accusation and shock. Alex's uncle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "This is a serious accusation, Mellie. Do you have any proof?" I pointed to my plate. "I'm calling the police, and they will give the food prepared by Mrs. Donovan for examination." And then Mrs. Donovan burst into tears. "I just wanted the best for my son. I thought if she was out of the picture, he'd find someone better, someone healthier." The confession hung in the air, heavy and damning. Alex looked at his mother, his expression one of utter betrayal. "You did this to Mellie? My wife?" I felt a mix of relief and despair. Relief that the truth was out, but despair at the cost. My relationship with Alex, our place in his family, everything was in shambles. The rest of the evening was a haze. There were arguments, people taking sides, some in disbelief, others in anger. Alex and I left early, the weight of what had happened bearing down on us. As we drove home, neither of us spoke. The silence was oppressive, filled with unasked questions and unspoken fears. What did this mean for us? For our future? The woman who was supposed to be my family had betrayed me in the worst way, and the fallout was something neither Alex nor I were prepared to handle. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Mrs. Donovan's confession, the look of shock on Alex's face, the whispers of the guests. The confrontation had brought the truth to light, but it had also opened a wound that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. One evening, as Alex and I sat together, the silence between us felt particularly profound. Breaking the stillness, I turned to Alex. "We need to talk about what's next, about the police." He looked at me, his expression solemn yet supportive. "I've been thinking about that too. It's your decision, Mellie. I'll back you up, whatever you choose." I mulled over the thought, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. It's just, going to the police feels like opening a Pandora's box. It's not just about exposing what happened, it's about airing family issues in public. He nodded understandingly. "I know it's hard, but remember, you're the one who's been wronged. If you want to pursue this legally, I'm with you." After a pause, I let out a deep breath. "No, I don't think I want to go down that road, but there's something else I've decided." I hesitated, gathering my courage. "I can't see your mother again, Alex. After everything, I can't." Alex's reaction was quiet, contemplative. "I understand. And honestly, I feel the same. After what she did, I can't just carry on as if nothing's happened. I won't see her either." His words were a relief, a validation of my feelings. "It's going to be hard, Alex. She's your mother." He squeezed my hand, firm and reassuring. "I know, but what she did, it's unforgivable. Our relationship, our marriage, comes first." In the days that followed, we both stood by our decision. It was a difficult period, adjusting to this new reality where Mrs. Donovan was no longer a part of our lives. There were moments of doubt, of questioning whether we were too harsh, but we supported each other through them. We started focusing more on ourselves, on rebuilding and strengthening our bond. We made plans for the future, small things to look forward to, like weekend getaways and quiet evenings together. As we moved forward, I realized that this ordeal, as painful as it was, had brought us closer. We had faced a challenge together, one that tested the very foundation of our relationship and had come out stronger.